We've known each other for a while. Probably we need to put that conflict of interest on the table.
We have largely because of the great work that you used to do in the community with helping to establish the precursor to the what we were.
Mate, it's not election year. You can stop. You can stop that now.
The thing is, I'd vote for you every time because you're a mate. Doesn't mean we necessarily agree on everything,
No,
but you're bloody good in the community.
Oh, thanks.
You always have been.
No, thanks for that, Jarrod. But I'm really keen to have a yarn with you today because if we're all going to blow smoke places, you are the expert on gangs in New Zealand, right?
Yeah, well, I'm called.
I read that somewhere.
The leading expert on gangs, but there aren't too many others, so it's not much stuck, to be honest. But I have done a fair bit of work.
And you're well known for your book and some of the other work you've done. PhD was in gangs as well.
Yeah.
And it's kind of flavour of the month with the government, and I'm just a spokesperson.
It's never far away from the agenda, is it?
It's never, no. Look, so first out of the gate, this is kind of gangs, good or bad?
Oh, I think you'd have to say bad, clearly, from a societal point of view, but from the individuals that join them, it becomes a little more complex because if they didn't serve a function, they wouldn't exist. This is just a logic, right?
Yeah.
You know, like if nothing exists, if it doesn't provide a function. And so for those people who join it, they serve very specific functions around a sense of belonging, effective kin relationships, brotherhood as they call it, and a sense of status. So they do provide something for those people. But
so
overall,
because we've had some gang members come to Parliament and talk about the gang patch ban and stuff like that.
Yep.
And one of the things that some of them say, particularly the older ones, is that it's a kind of health. That there's some healthy aspect to it. Now I'm really sceptical of that.
There's something to that, right? There is something to that. I would argue that you could get some particularly really maladjusted individuals who would join the gang environment, and they would be tempered by it. I think there's something in that, but those are kind of largely exceptions. We do hear, and I will know a lot of the people that came to Parliament, and I'll know them well, and we could list them. And they are good men, and they've matured over the years. I feel like Dennis O'Reilly's always been a pretty smart cookie right throughout, actually. But people have matured over the years, and they see things differently as you get older, as we do. Do you know what I mean?
But I mean, I guess that's the point, right?
And you get a bit smarter.
A 55-year-old member of the mob doesn't have the same ability to harm the community or desire as some 18-year-old who wants to make their mark, right?
And see, but the slight concern, and we should be jumping all over those positive changes that the gangs are making around family harm and methamphetamine use and things like that. We should be really jumping on top of that because it's in our interests to do so. But the flip side to that is that if you make the gangs into too pro-social and they start to sort of do too much right, then the young rebellious louts won't be joining them. They'll be joining somewhere else, right? So fixing that top end and taking the roughest edges off is a good thing regardless. But unless we're dealing with the drivers for the young people wanting to join, then we're probably on a hiding to nothing.
You used the fancy word in there, which was pro-social, right? And I guess the whole point of the gang environment for a lot is that it's the opposite of being within society, right? The whole idea is that you want to step outside of what's accepted and normal because you want to live a different life.
Yeah, correct.
Well, I mean, there's going to be a natural and very difficult tension with people who don't want to obey the rules.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So, and this is a difficult balance for those pro-social gang leaders because they're trying to move the gang in this direction, but it's against the socialisation or instinct or whatever it might be of their membership to go that way. And we think of gang leaders as being all powerful. Man, they've got to be politicians in their own right to manage, to govern the ungovernable.
Being chief whip of the Labour Party was tough enough. Being chief whip of the mongrel mob's going to be another thing altogether.
Well, that's right. I mean, like chances are, you would have had your tough times, but no one would have come at you with a spade or a shiv.
No, that's right. Hey, but that's the almost theoretical stuff there, but. Going down to what the government's proposing, right? So one of the challenges I have with it is that they're essentially creating a class of people, gang members, who have a whole different, who the law looks at differently. not only that, but I wonder how effective any of this is going to be. I mean, gang patches. You and I have got a bit of history with gang patches.
Yeah.
I mean, why are they important, and what will banning them do?
This is such a big topic. I mean, it's such a simple thing, banning gang patches, like to the public.
Yeah, this is the point, right? So simple.
Simple, and yet, you've just touched on 3 or 4 things there that you could talk about. You could talk a whole hour on the different nuances.
Bloody academics.
And yeah, well, but just before we move away from the academics and just at the academic nature and get to the pragmatics, but we oughtn't lose sight of the rights-based issues here. We really oughtn't. And as a former academic yourself, Duncan, I'm I'm an academic now. If people like you and I don't concern ourselves with that, then very few won't. So it is really important. But at a practical level, look, in New Zealand, we're unique in the true sense of the word. That New Zealand's gang scene is unique in that all of the gangs here, by and large, wear gang patches. Internationally, that doesn't happen. It's only the outlaw motorcycle clubs that do it, the Hells Angels or whatever. So we're highly visible, but internationally, they have all of the problems that we complain about with regard to gangs, without the patches. So is removing the patches going to change the behaviours? And again, even just to take it back to a logic, what if you're targeting appearance? It is very unlikely to change behaviour.
Right.
And and when the ban was proposed in Whanganui, which was ultimately struck down by the High Court back in the early 2000s, whenever that was, the arguments were made by some high-ranking police officers at the time that it would drive gangs underground because they become less visible, making policing harder. So in a perverse way, it could have some unintended consequences.
One of the real narratives around this crackdown on gangs, which is using the other side's language, right, is... But
on that, sorry, Doug, sorry to interrupt. Sorry, I do apologize, but do you know what? Regardless of the language, though, I think we do need to acknowledge the harm that is being created in the community. Now, it might be overblown from time to time and disproportionate.
Yeah.
But the public has a genuine right to feel concerned about some of the activities of gangs from time to time. Right? And the gangs have got a bit out of line.
No. And I don't think anyone is going to disagree with you that gang violence, and the domestic harm that goes on in those families, and the kind of serious drug.
And the gang wars that we've seen.
All the gang, it's really bad. But one of the things I did want to talk about, which is kind of the more outward-looking stuff, is this sense of gangs as just being intimidating. As one of their major harms is that they intimidate, and the sense that, and I think the Labour Party kind of didn't win over the community on this, because even though people might not have been victims of gang crime, they felt unsafe. They felt that one day they might be, and we lost that, right?
Well, the thing is, I mean, the problem with something like intimidation, or feeling intimidated, is a very subjective feeling. So, so what one person feels intimidated by might not be another, and I mean, you could suddenly get racial elements into that. So it's a very difficult area. But look, if you look at when gangs first started to enter the prisons in the 1970s, first mentioned in prison reports of 1978, 1979, if my memory serves me right, and into the 80s, it started to really create tensions. And there were conflicts between them. What did the prison authorities do? They did something incredibly intuitive. They removed any gang insignia, so you couldn't have pictures on the wall or anything like this. What was the consequence? Facial tattoos. So that's where the facial tattoo comes from. It's a ban of insignia led to something else entirely. So in trying to solve one problem, we created a vastly more significant one, because once you're tattooed in the face, very hard to leave the gang, right? And this comes down to intimidation, back to intimidation, merges the patches and intimidation. Because is somebody who may be inclined to feel intimidated, and I'm not going to judge them for that, because I can see how that can happen. Are they going to be less intimidated if they're not wearing a patch but have got mongrel mob or whatever written across their face? I really wouldn't think so. So again, these things become...
Because the other intimidation one is, the other aspect of the gang reforms is this dispersal order, right? Mm. So the idea being that if there's a group of 3 or more, gang members,
suspected gang members,
who are acting in a way which is disrupting other members of the public.
Yeah.
They can be dispersed and can't get together for the next 7 days, right?
Yeah.
Now, I guess, we talked about the importance of human rights and the fact that it's a basic human right to be able to assemble and be with whomever you want, to hang out. I mean, it's kind of, but it's how I do struggle with that. And I guess the other point is this, that what kind, it's again a partly practical one. How do you know whether you're interfering unreasonably with the activities of another member of the public?
This is putting a huge amount of important discretion on the police here, right? And by and large, I think, and I know you'll agree, we're well served by the New Zealand Police. Actually, if you make international comparisons, we do really well. They're perfect, not at all. And the problem is, you don't need too many instances. In fact, you only need really 1 or 2 instances where a cop oversteps the mark and abuses that power. Same as the firearms prohibition stuff, potentially going into properties. When you can suddenly set back police, public relations, and potentially also Māori Pākehā relations.
Well, yeah.
And
I guess this is the point of Parliament, right? For people, like me and other people from other parties to think really hard about how much powers you give to the police. Because I'll be honest,
you never get them back.
Well, you never get them back, and they'll take any powers you give them, right? Now, I don't mean that in a bad way. I just mean that they just think it's another tool. Well, you can trust us.
Well, when I did some research the last time a swathe of legislation went through around a big gang, it was a big gang concern. It was in the 1990s. A big wave of legislation went through. A lot of it was never used, literally never used. Yeah. But the laws that were used far more often against non-gang members than gang members. So the intent may be all well and good, but how it actually flows through can sometimes be entirely different. And again, this comes back to the rights thing to some degree, because I think when we talk about laws and it's just about the gangs, no one gives a damn, because it's just the gangs.
Well,
no one gives a damn, right? But the problem is that I think too often we use shorthand to talk about gangs, and in that we start to think about these big burly guys with tattoos and staunch. But if you go and hang out in gang communities, you're going to see far more numerous kids and aunties and uncles and cousins, and there's communities there too, right? So and more often than not, Maori communities. Now, nothing to say we can't police Maori communities. Of course, we have to, but there's a delicate. You've got to be cognizant at least of the potential issue.
Some of the advice that came out of the Ministry of Justice was that if you go down this road and you kind of push the gangs away and say
marginalise them all,
you're not just marginalising them, but you're marginalising the women, the children, and a whole lot of other people who then don't have recourse to the kind of
that's right,
or to the justice system. Well,
and they feel. They become socialised to see an enemy of the state. It means they don't engage with it, rebel against it, and often will commit crimes against it because they've got no buy-in to it. So, there are flow-on effects here. And look, I think, again, you and I would have talked about this a lot, that it's very difficult to change people when they're adults. You need to socialise people when they're very, very young. And I think that's the that preventative approach is something that we pay so little heed to, and yet it's the one thing that I think over a longer term will have a chance to be.
That's a massive challenge, right? Because we actually have a pretty good idea, genuine evidence on what the kind of risk matrix looks like for someone who's being born into a struggling community or family, right? And there are some supports that, but we don't put a lot of energy into identifying and really resourcing that family and that young person, do we?
No, of course not. And look, if you think about on the hustings, both parties in reality, but certainly in the last one it was national, we're going tough on crime, but there's no mention of what creates that crime or the drivers of that crime. Those things that we absolutely are aware of. So there's nothing in the 100-day plan talking about prevention of what we're going to do to help the kids.
The problem is it's a 20-year plan, right?
It's a generational plan.
It's a generational plan.
That's
So
right.
so the whatever it might be, the $20,000 or $100,000 spent on a family over the next 3 years, and what happens? Nothing. If nothing happens in that family, that's a success.
Yeah, that's right.
It's actually a hard political sell. How do we get over the politics of that?
Yeah, it is. Well, one of the things I think when we were speaking to people when I was part of the Justice Advisory Group a few years back, one of the things that we spoke to was a non-partisan approach to these kind of key issues between Labor and National. But I just can't see it. I can't see it happening. I think the electoral advantage is too high.
Yeah, I wonder if the answer is to take small and incremental wins. I know, we were chatting before about one of the innovations that I think might have been a National Party innovation, and then was expanded under the Labor Party, and that was the alcohol and drug courts. Right now, they seem to work.
That's right, and you're right. I think it can be small wins, because there are certain things. There will always be differences of belief and differences of approach, but there are some things that we can and ought be able to agree on, and I'd love to see more of that consensus. And I guess that's the challenge for you.
So, alcohol and drug court. What's the difference there?
I think that really impressed me, and because we've talked about. The idea that you need to have a multifaceted approach, right? The drivers of crime are so complex that it's going to require complex solutions. That's going to mean multi-agencies and multi-interventions to wrap around to get the right solution. More wheels to the shoulder, or more shoulders to the wheel. And that's what I saw at that drug court. Yeah. That the different things that a person needed were put around them, and then they were monitored on a very regular basis to ensure these things were being done.
There's about a dozen people around the table, isn't there?
It's incredible. It's incredible.
Not just lawyers and judges and what have you. You've got police, housing, social workers, alcohol and drug workers, peer support.
I have. It is a court like no other, and I think. I couldn't speak more highly enough about it. And again, I think it is one of those things that has come in under one party, was supported again by the other side, and that's a good sign of success.
I guess the one thing that I want to address though is because there's a suggestion that it's not being tough on crime. It's not a real consequence. What do you think about that kind of? Because look. One of the things I think we need to face up with is that the community actually wants a bit of payback, right? And when people do really quite heinous things, they don't want them to be counselled; they want to be punished. How do we address that?
Well, it is actually a fundamental component of justice, right? That we do get a sense of retribution, and there is a sense of punishment. That is really important. So. Of any action that's taken, that has to be a component. But my fear is that often we see it as the only component. Right. Whereas what we want to do is two things. We want to make sure we're holding somebody to account, and so therefore punishing them, but also putting things in place to ensure when they're back on the community, or they've served their sentence, if it's community or in prison or whatever, that we reduce the chances that there's going to be another offender down the line. So it doesn't have to be it's not an or, one or the other. It's an and. And we're not good at the and. We just talk about one, and particularly at the moment. I mean, that's all we talk about.
I mean, corrections is a real. It should be renamed, right? Because it doesn't correct much.
It is a tough job. It is a tough job. We're saying we're going to throw these people into this really difficult environment and say fix them. I mean, it's you're on a hiding to nothing there. But more than that, as Bill English discovered, it's also extremely expensive, right? So I when Labor said they were going to build Waikaria, I was supportive of it because the prison population was going up so significantly. You needed to.
Has to be.
You needed to, but you cut it in half and stabilised, and in fact dropped the prison population, so it was manageable. Double bunking kind of largely disappeared. Yes. All these things are good, but we're back on an upswing now, and National's having to extend that Waikaria back to its original plan. Well, that debate's going to come back around very, very quickly, because that's going to fill up swiftly.
Yeah.
And so suddenly we're going to have to spend a whole lot more. And I don't think there'd be too many in the public who'd be wanting to spend $1 billion or $2 billion on a prison when you could spend the same on a school or a hospital.
Oh, look, and so the cost of a prisoner per annum average is about $200,000.
Yeah, smidgen under, yeah.
And you think, you know, if we use that money elsewhere, could we have better social outcomes, right?
Well, I think you talked about it before, right? If we spend $100,000 on an at-risk family over 10 years, if those kids were going to go on and populate prison for 1, 2 or 3 years, collectively it might be 20 years.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the savings there are astronomical. But it's not just the savings in the financial sense. It's lack of victims, of course, so the social cost, but also you're giving those kids a chance to enjoy a good, healthy life where they can become what they could, you know, they can fulfill their potential, rather than, the pathway for many people in prison was so well paved, it would have been remarkable if they weren't in prison. It's not remarkable that they are.
Yeah. So I guess it's worth recognising that those people that do find themselves on that path, or even in prison, and then do manage to climb out, that's actually, the point is it's actually the exception, not the rule.
Yeah, well, it absolutely is, and in fact, the greatest determinant of that is age. Again, you know, you see the reoffending rates increase quite significantly, and then come away around the age 40. They start to drop off as we get a bit tired and
lose the energy.
But I mean, that's kind of depressing, isn't it? Because for all of the efforts that we might put in, age is the
biggest
age out of it.
Yeah. All right, mate. Well, thanks for coming along. It's been a really interesting chat.
I've enjoyed it.
I suspect there'll be lots more to talk about on this, and hopefully we get progress, right?
Yeah.
Because, you know, prisons can be no good for anyone, and crime, there's all those victims out there, and we need to address it. So, but
we do.
Thanks for your work in it.
Oh, thank you for you, Doug. That's what you do.
Take care.
Cheers, mate.